The bank statement glowed blue in the darkness of David Chen's Seattle apartment, and right there, line 47, was a transaction that shouldn't exist. $300 sent to a dead woman. Not his wife. His wife, Sarah, had been gone for 6 years. Cancer took her in the spring of 2018, turned her into something made of paper and whispers. No, this money, every single month since she died, went to Sarah's mother, Margaret. Sweet Margaret, who'd held his hand at the funeral, who called him son even after Sarah was ash in an urn on his bookshelf. Except Margaret Fletcher died in a car accident outside Portland 3 months ago. And the payments never stopped. David's finger hovered over the routing number. The account was still active, still accepting his grief, transformed into $300 digital dollars, month after month after month. Someone was cashing these checks. Someone had been pretending to be a dead woman for 90 days. The apartment suddenly felt like it was breathing. Before we dive into this shocking story, smash that like button right now and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. And comment where you're watching from: New York City, Los Angeles, or maybe Chicago. All right, let's continue. David Chen was a software engineer, 34 years old, the kind of man who organized his spice rack alphabetically and believed the universe ran on code, inputs and outputs, cause and effect. When Sarah died, he'd created a system for his grief. Therapy on Tuesdays, gym on Thursdays, $300 to Margaret on the first of every month because Sarah had always sent money home, and David couldn't bear to let that connection die too. It was automation. Set it and forget it. And he had forgotten it beautifully, the way you forget the beating of your own heart. Until Margaret's daughter, Sarah's sister Jennifer, called him in October to ask if he wanted any of their mother's things. That's when he learned. Highway 26, rainstorm, semi-truck. Margaret never saw it coming. He'd said all the right words, offered condolences, hung up. And then, because he was a software engineer, because the universe was code, he checked his bank statements. September, $300 to Margaret Fletcher. October, $300 to Margaret Fletcher. November, $300 to Margaret Fletcher. He called the bank at 8:47 a.m. on a Thursday. The representative, Donna, according to her email signature, confirmed the account was active. Yes, the funds were being withdrawn. No, she couldn't tell him who was accessing the account without a subpoena or a police report. "Is there a problem, Mr. Chen?" David looked at Sarah's urn. The cherry wood caught the morning light. "No," he said, "no problem." But he was already opening his laptop, already becoming something other than a grieving widower, becoming a detective, becoming obsessed. Margaret Fletcher lived in Beaverton, Oregon, a small ranch house with a garden that looked like a painting, roses and lavender and those aggressive dahlias that bloom like small suns. David had visited twice, once for Christmas, once for Sarah's birthday memorial. Margaret had made pot roast both times, had told him the same story about Sarah learning to ride a bike, how she'd crashed into the mailbox and laughed with a mouthful of blood. The house was sold in November. Jennifer handled the estate. When David casually asked, so casual, so careful, who was managing Margaret's affairs, Jennifer said everything was closed, all accounts settled. But one account wasn't closed. David found the bank, Columbia River Credit Union, a small regional branch in northeast Portland. Not Margaret's primary bank. He'd never heard her mention it. He drove down on a Saturday, told himself he was just visiting Sarah's hometown, paying respects. The lie tasted like copper. The credit union sat between a Vietnamese restaurant and a vacuum repair shop. Brick facade, 2 ATMs. Inside, it smelled like old carpet and the particular sadness of fluorescent lighting. David stood in the lobby for 7 minutes, watching tellers help elderly couples with their Christmas Club accounts, before he realized he had no plan. What was he going to say? "Excuse me, I've been sending money to a ghost?" He turned to leave. "Can I help you?" The woman wore a name tag that said Alice. 60-something with the kind of gray hair that looked like expensive silver. Her smile was professional, but her eyes were studying him like he was a puzzle with missing pieces. "I'm just looking," David said. "For someone?" The question landed wrong, too specific, too knowing. "My mother-in-law banked here, Margaret Fletcher. She passed recently. I'm just tying up loose ends." Alice's smile never wavered, but something behind it shifted, like a door closing in a distant room. "I'm so sorry for your loss. If you have documentation, we can certainly help with estate matters." "The thing is," David said, and now he was committed, falling forward into whatever this was, "there's an account still receiving deposits. I've been sending money for her support, but she's been gone for months." Alice nodded, clicked something on her computer. The silence stretched like taffy. "Mr. David," she said. More clicking. Then Alice looked up and her face was perfectly, terrifyingly blank. "I'm afraid I can't find any account under that name receiving external deposits. Are you sure it was this branch?" But David had seen the routing number, had called and confirmed it, had memorized the account number like a prayer. 783-49921-3487. "Yes," he said, "I'm sure." Alice's smile returned. Sometimes these things take time to process through the system. Estate closures can be complicated. I'm sure it's just an administrative delay. She was lying. David wrote code for a living. He knew when systems didn't match their outputs. He also knew when he was being dismissed. "Right," he said. "Thank you." He left, sat in his car in the parking lot, watched Alice through the window as she picked up a phone, spoke to someone he couldn't see, hung up, and walked quickly into a back office. The universe ran on code, and this code had a bug. David started digging the way engineers dig, methodically, obsessively, with a growing disregard for things like sleep and appropriate social boundaries. He requested 6 months of bank statements, highlighted every transaction to Margaret's account in yellow, created a spreadsheet with withdrawal patterns. The money was being taken out in cash, small amounts, 50 here, 80 there, 45. Never enough to trigger fraud alerts, never in a pattern predictable enough to trace, but it added up. Over 3 months, $900 deposited. Over 3 months, $900 withdrawn. Someone was living off his grief. He told himself he should go to the police, told himself this was fraud, identity theft, something prosecutable and clean, but he didn't, because a part of him, the part that still talked to Sarah's urn at night, that still slept on only one side of the bed, needed to know who would do this, who would steal from the dead and the grieving both. He hired a private investigator on December 3rd. Her name was Rosa Delgado, and she worked out of an office above a bail bonds place in southeast Portland. 52 years old, former Portland PD, with the kind of handshake that meant business. "This is unusual," she said, reviewing his file, "but not unheard of. Usually it's family, someone who knew the deceased's banking information, someone who needs money and figures no one's checking." "It's not Jennifer," David said immediately, Sarah's sister. "She's a doctor in Spokane. She doesn't need—" "Everyone needs money, Mr. Chen, and grief makes people do unexpected things." But Rosa agreed to investigate, $2,000 up front, daily rate plus expenses. David paid without hesitation. What else was he going to spend it on? The apartment in Seattle was paid off, Sarah's life insurance. His job covered everything else. The money was just numbers in an account, meaningless as ashes. Rosa called 4 days later. "You need to come to Portland," she said, "now." They met at a coffee shop in the Pearl District. Rosa had a folder thick as a Bible and an expression David couldn't read. "I found who's accessing the account, but you're not going to believe it." She slid a photo across the table. It showed a woman at an ATM, late 50s, maybe early 60s, thin with dark hair going gray at the temples, wearing a quilted jacket and holding a reusable grocery bag. David stared. That's not Margaret. Margaret had short blonde hair. She was... I know. This is Diane Kowalski. She worked as a home health aide, took care of your mother-in-law during her final months of cancer treatment. Margaret didn't have cancer. Rosa's eyes were very steady. Not Margaret, Mr. Chen. Sarah. The coffee shop tilted. David gripped the table. Sarah had a health aide at the end. I remember. She came 3 times a week, but her name was... I don't remember her name. Diane, Rosa said quietly. She was there when Sarah died. According to the hospice records, she was the one who called you at work, told you to come home. David remembered the phone call that split his life into before and after. A woman's voice, gentle and professional. Mr. Chen, you should come now. Sarah's asking for you. He'd driven 90 in a 60 zone, ran 2 red lights, held Sarah's hand as she drowned in her own lungs, morphine turning her into someone who mistook him for her father, then her childhood dog, then finally, mercifully, nothing. What does Diane Kowalski have to do with Margaret's account? Rosa opened the folder. Inside were bank documents, photocopies, a trail of paper that told a story David didn't want to hear. Margaret Fletcher opened that credit union account in 2019, 1 year after Sarah died. She added Diane Kowalski as a joint account holder in 2020. When Margaret died in October, the account automatically transferred to Diane, legally, completely above board. But why? Why would Margaret give a home health aide? Because Diane wasn't just Sarah's aide, Mr. Chen. She was Margaret's too. After Sarah died, Margaret had early onset Alzheimer's. Diane took care of her for 3 years, and according to these records, Margaret made Diane the beneficiary on that account specifically so she could continue receiving the support you were sending. The world had gone very quiet. David could hear his own heartbeat, thick and wrong. Margaret had Alzheimer's? Jennifer never told me. Jennifer didn't know, at least the extent. Margaret hid it well, but Diane knew. Diane was there every day watching Margaret forget her own daughter's name, forget that Sarah was dead, forget everything except that every month you sent money. And Margaret wanted to make sure Diane was taken care of, so she made it legal. Rosa slid another document across the table, a handwritten note, shaky cursive on blue paper. To David, you've been so good to me, like a son. This account is for Diane. She's taken care of me like Sarah would have wanted. Please don't stop the payments. She needs them. She's family now, too. The note was dated 6 months before Margaret died, before the Alzheimer's had taken her completely. A lucid window where she'd tried to arrange the future. So Diane just, decided not to tell me Margaret died? Rosa's expression was careful. I spoke to Diane yesterday, told her I was investigating financial irregularities. She was terrified, started crying immediately, said she knew she should have contacted you, but she was scared. She's a single mother, 2 kids, works 3 jobs. That $300 is the difference between making rent and not. She said she kept meaning to reach out, explain, but every month she told herself, next month, and then it became this thing she couldn't undo. She stole from me. Technically, she didn't. The account was joint. Margaret left it to her. But morally? Rosa shrugged. That's between you and her. David sat in his car outside Diane Kowalski's apartment for 45 minutes before he found the courage to knock. The building was in Gresham, East Portland's tired edge. 3 stories of beige siding and broken dreams, kids' bikes chained to the stairwell, someone's Christmas lights blinking arrhythmically, half the Strand already dead. Apartment 2C. Diane opened the door, and David recognized her instantly. Thinner now, more worn, but the same gentle eyes that had told him to hurry home 6 years ago. "Mr. Chen," she whispered. "Can I come in?" Her apartment was small, clean, smelled like cinnamon and something cooking, beans maybe. Rice. 2 kids' backpacks by the door. Lego bricks scattered across a rug that had been vacuumed recently but would never look new again. Diane sat on the edge of her couch like a prisoner awaiting sentence. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I know I should have told you. I wanted to. Every single month I wanted to." "Why didn't you?" "Because I'm ashamed," her voice cracked. "Because I'm a 58-year-old woman who can barely keep the lights on. Because that money, your money, is the only reason my kids have eaten regularly this year. My daughter needs glasses. We can't afford the copay, but with your $300, we can. Does that make me a thief? Probably. Does it make me desperate? Definitely." David looked around the apartment, saw the crackling in the ceiling paint, the space heater in the corner because the building's heat barely worked, a calendar on the wall with shifts marked in 3 different colors: home health aide work, night shifts at a grocery store, weekend janitorial services. "Tell me about Margaret," he said. And Diane did. She told him about how Margaret called her Sarah sometimes, how on bad days Margaret would set 2 places for dinner, waiting for a daughter who would never come home, how Diane learned to play along, to become Sarah for an hour or 2, because it made Margaret happy, how Margaret would cry when she remembered the truth. She told him about the day Margaret wrote that note, how she'd grabbed Diane's hand and said, "David's a good boy. He keeps sending money. I want you to have it when I'm gone. You take care of me like Sarah would." She told him about the car accident, how she'd gone to the funeral, stood in the back, didn't introduce herself, because what would she say? "Hi, I'm the woman who's been taking your inheritance?" "I knew it was wrong," Diane said, "but I also knew Margaret wanted it to me. She told me, made it legal, and I needed it so badly. My ex-husband doesn't pay child support. I'm drowning in medical debt from when my son broke his arm. That $300 is my life raft. Without it—" She didn't finish, didn't need to. David sat in silence, thought about Sarah, about how she'd wanted to be a nurse, how she'd volunteer at the free clinic on weekends, how she'd cry over stories about hungry kids and broken families. Sarah, who believed in taking care of people. "Margaret had Alzheimer's," he finally said. "Yes." "Jennifer didn't know how bad it was?" "Margaret made me promise not to tell her, said Jennifer had enough to worry about with her own kids." "Were you there when Margaret died?" Diane shook her head. "No, she was driving to my house, was supposed to arrive for dinner. She never made it." The silence filled with ghosts. "I sent that money for Sarah," David said, "because she loved her mother, because it was the last thing connecting me to her." "I know. And now you're telling me I've been sending it to the woman who took care of both of them, who made Margaret's last years bearable, who played Sarah when Margaret needed her to." Diane was crying now, silent tears tracking through the exhaustion on her face. "I don't know what you want me to say, Mr. Chen. I don't have the money to pay you back. I spent it on rent and food and my kids. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." David stood, looked at the backpacks again, noticed the names written in Sharpie, Emma and Lucas. "How old are they?" "Emma's 12, Lucas is 9. Sarah had wanted kids, had made him promise that if anything happened to her, he'd find someone else, have a family, fill their house with noise and chaos and love. He'd never been able to. The apartment stayed quiet. "I'm not going to stop the payments," David said. Diane looked up, confused. "What?" "The $300 every month. I'm not stopping it, but I need you to promise me something. Anything. Use it for your kids. Food, clothes, school supplies, those glasses. Use it the way Sarah would have wanted. Can you do that?" Diane was fully sobbing now. She nodded, unable to speak. David walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. "And Diane, next time, just tell me the truth, okay?" "Okay," she whispered. David drove back to Seattle, and for the first time in 6 years, he felt something other than grief. But the story wasn't over. 3 weeks later, Jennifer called him, Sarah's sister. Her voice was strange, tight and angry in a way he'd never heard before. "Did you know?" she demanded. "Know what? About Mom? About the Alzheimer's? About her giving money to some random home health aide?" David's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "I found the documents going through her safe deposit box, the note, the bank statements. She gave that woman joint access to an account I didn't even know existed, an account you were funding. Why didn't you tell me my mother was sick?" "I didn't know. I swear, Jennifer. I just found out." "Bullshit. You've been sending money for years. You never thought to check on her, to actually visit, to tell her she needed help?" The accusation hit like a fist, because Jennifer was right. David had automated his grief, had sent money like penance, like prayer, without actually checking if Margaret needed more than cash, without calling, without visiting, without seeing. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I should have. That woman stole from our family, from Mom's estate, and you're telling me you didn't know?" "It wasn't stealing. Margaret made her a joint account holder, legally." "I don't care about legally. She manipulated a sick old woman. My mother had Alzheimer's. She wasn't competent to make those decisions, and now I find out she was giving away money that should have gone to her grandchildren, to me, to someone who was probably taking advantage of her." "Diane wasn't taking advantage. She took care of your mother. You don't know that. You don't know anything. You just sent money and pretended you were still part of our family, and now Mom's gone and you're defending the person who robbed her." The call ended. Jennifer was going to sue, was going to contest the account, claim Margaret wasn't of sound mind, demand the money back, all of it, every penny David had sent for 3 months, money Diane had already spent on rent and food and her daughter's glasses. David sat in his Seattle apartment, surrounded by the life he'd built from the wreckage of Sarah's death, and realized he was going to have to choose. He chose Diane. He hired a lawyer, a good one, expensive, the kind who charged $400 an hour and wore suits that cost more than Diane's monthly rent. They built a case. Margaret's note was dated before the worst of the Alzheimer's. She'd been evaluated by her primary care physician that same month, declared competent. The joint account was legal. Diane had cared for Margaret for years. The hospice had records, testimonials, documentation of her dedication. Jennifer's lawyer countered with her own experts, showed evidence of Margaret's decline, questioned why a home health aide would be given such a gift unless she manipulated a vulnerable patient, painted Diane as a predator in scrubs. The case dragged through winter and into spring, cost David $40,000 in legal fees, cost him his relationship with Jennifer. They stopped speaking entirely, communicated only through lawyers. Cost him sleep and peace and the fragile equilibrium he'd built from grief. But in the end, the court ruled in Diane's favor. The account was legal. The money was hers. Jennifer was ordered to pay court costs. David won. It felt like losing. He met Diane one last time in April, a coffee shop in Portland. She'd brought her kids this time, Emma and Lucas, shy and sweet, wearing new clothes that actually fit. "I don't know how to thank you," Diane said. "The lawyer said you paid for everything. You didn't have to do that." "Yes," David said, "I did." Emma was wearing glasses, pink frames with little stars on the temples. She was reading a book about space, something about black holes and the death of stars. David watched her read and thought about Sarah, about how she'd wanted to be a mother, about how she'd loved fiercely, impractically, with a generosity that had made David feel small and inspired at the same time. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Diane. "When you took care of Sarah, at the end, was she scared?" Diane's eyes softened. "No, she was ready. She told me she'd had a good life, that she'd married the right person, that her only regret was not having more time." "Did she say anything else?" "She said," Diane hesitated, "she said to tell you it was okay to be happy again, that grief is just love with nowhere to go, and you should find somewhere to put it. David's throat tightened. She actually said that? Word for word, made me promise to tell you if I ever got the chance. Emma looked up from her book. Are you the man who sends us money? Emma, Diane started. It's okay, David said. Yes, I am. Mom says you knew our guardian angel. Guardian angel? Diane flushed. I told them about Sarah, about how she was brave and kind, and how she watches over people even now. I hope that's okay. David looked at this woman, tired, struggling, doing her best with bad odds and worse luck, and her kids who were alive and fed and clothed, partly because he'd automated a payment 6 years ago and forgotten to cancel it. It's more than okay, he said. David kept sending the money, but he changed it. Instead of $300 to Margaret's old account, he set up a trust. $500 a month, specifically for Emma and Lucas's education, untouchable until college, managed by a law firm that would ensure Diane couldn't access it even if she wanted to. And then he added another $200, direct to Diane, no strings, for groceries and rent and the endless emergencies of single parenthood. You don't have to do this, Diane said when he told her. I know, but Sarah would have. So I am. The money was just money, but it was also more than that. It was the last connection to Sarah, transformed. Not grief anymore, something else, something that looked like Sarah's own impossible generosity. He started volunteering at a hospice in Seattle, every Thursday evening sitting with people in their final days, reading to them, listening to their stories, holding hands that had nothing left to grip. It was hard, hurt in ways he couldn't name, but it also felt like Sarah was there, guiding his hands, whispering instructions for how to be present with the dying. One patient, Margaret, coincidentally, a different Margaret, told him about her own daughter, how she died young, how the grief never got smaller, you just got bigger around it. The trick, this Margaret said, her voice thin as paper, is to let the grief grow something. Like compost, all that rot can feed something beautiful if you let it. David thought about Diane's kids, about Emma's glasses and Lucas's new winter coat, and about how Sarah's death had created a chain of care that stretched beyond the grave, beyond reason, into something that looked almost like resurrection. The grief hadn't gotten smaller, but maybe he'd gotten bigger around it. He also reached out to Jennifer, sent a letter, careful and humble, explaining everything. He didn't expect forgiveness, didn't ask for it, just offered the truth and an apology for not seeing what Margaret needed when she was alive. Jennifer didn't respond for 3 months. When she finally did, it was a single email. I understand. I'm sorry too. Let's talk. They met in Portland. Awkward at first, 2 people who once were family navigating the wreckage of grief and lawsuits. But slowly, carefully, they rebuilt something. Not what it was, something smaller, more honest. I was angry you got to keep sending money, like you got to keep being the good guy, and I just had to watch Mom forget me. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I blamed you for not reading minds. They laughed. It felt strange, inappropriate, also necessary. Sarah would have hated us fighting. Sarah would have adopted Diane's kids and remodeled their apartment. God, she really would have. They toasted with coffee. To Sarah, to Margaret, to the messy, impossible work of loving people even after they're gone. Here's what David learned in the aftermath of the living and the dead trading places. The money we send into the void doesn't always land where we expect, but that doesn't mean it lands wrong. He'd thought he was supporting Margaret. Turned out he was supporting a single mother and her kids. Was that worse? Different? Or just proof that care finds its way like water, following the path of least resistance toward the people who need it most? Where has your grief landed, and did it grow something you didn't expect? Automation can be a gift or a curse, depending on whether you're avoiding pain or honoring memory. David had set up the payment to preserve his connection to Sarah, but by forgetting about it, by not checking, he'd also avoided the real work of staying connected to her family. The system ran perfectly. The relationships atrophied. What are you automating that deserves your actual attention? The people who care for the dying deserve more than we give them. Diane had been invisible. A home health aide, disposable labor, someone who cleaned bodies and changed sheets for minimum wage and no glory. But she'd been there when Sarah took her last breath, had been there when Margaret forgot her own name, had shown up day after day for people who couldn't pay her what she was worth. Who are the invisible caregivers in your life, and have you thanked them? Legal and moral are not the same thing, and the gap between them is where we find out who we are. The court said Diane deserved the money. Jennifer said she didn't. Both were right. Both were wrong. David had to choose which kind of right mattered more. When the law and your conscience point different directions, which one do you follow? Grief doesn't end. It just changes shape. And if you're lucky, it changes into something useful. David would never stop missing Sarah, but the missing had become something active now. A trust fund for kids he barely knew, volunteer hours at a hospice, a monthly payment that meant someone could buy groceries. The grief was still there, it was just doing work now. What would happen if your pain became someone else's relief? On the 6th anniversary of Sarah's death, David drove to Portland, visited the cemetery where she was buried. The urn had eventually made it here, next to Margaret, in a plot with a view of Mount Hood. He brought flowers, sat on the grass, talked to the stone the way he used to talk to the urn. "I met your family," he said, "the one you made after you were gone. Diane and Emma and Lucas. They're good people. I think you'd like them." The wind moved through the trees. A crow called from somewhere close. "I'm sorry I forgot about Margaret. Sorry I didn't visit more. Sorry I automated us." A family walked past. Mother, father, 2 kids. The little girl was wearing pink glasses, and for a moment David's heart stopped. But it wasn't Emma. Just another kid. Just another family navigating the world of the living. "I'm trying to do what you would do," David said to the stone, "trying to be generous, trying to see the people everyone else overlooks. It's harder than you made it look." He stood, brushed grass from his jeans. That's when he saw her. Diane, standing by a car in the cemetery parking lot. Diane, Emma, and Lucas with her, holding flowers of their own. David walked over. "What are you doing here?" "We come every year," Diane said, "to visit both of them, Margaret and Sarah. The kids never met Sarah, but I tell them stories. Felt like we should pay respects." Emma held up her flowers, daisies, bright yellow, already wilting in the heat. "For our guardian angel," she said solemnly. David felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen since the day Sarah died. Not grief anymore, something warmer, something that felt dangerously close to joy. "Can we visit together?" he asked. Diane smiled. "We'd like that." So they did. 4 people gathered around 2 graves, leaving flowers for women who'd been connected by blood and care and death and a bank account that should have closed but didn't. 4 people who'd been strangers, linked now by an accident of grief and generosity. Lucas tugged David's sleeve. "Mom says you're the reason I get to go to summer camp." "Your mom takes care of people," David said. "I just help a little." "That's what guardian angels do," Lucas said with the absolute certainty of 9-year-olds. They help. David looked at Diane, at her kids, at the graves, at the whole impossible chain of events that had started with a forgotten automated payment and ended here, in a cemetery in Portland, with a family he never knew he'd been building. Sarah's voice in his memory. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. But that wasn't quite right, David thought. Grief was love that had to find new places to land, new people to care for, new ways to matter. He'd sent money to a dead woman and accidentally funded a life. The universe didn't run on code. It ran on something messier, more beautiful, something that looked like grace if you squinted.